from the rain and the stone, where the wind has no name and the traveler's alone. There's warmth in the fire and truth in the tale of the watcher who walks where the bold-hearted fail. He carries no sword, yet the darkness gives way to the lantern he lifts at the end of the day. He stands on the watchtower, still and unswayed, where the lost find a path through the fog and the fray. Pilgrim gray, oh steward of the lands, you carry the light in your weather-worn hands. A tale at the hearth, a guide through the night. You open the gate between the wrong and the right. Not in thunder, but whispers in song, where seed lines have warred in the silence too long. From Babel to Kaffir, from shadow to flame, the chronicles grow with each hidden name. He bears not a crown, but the weight of the truth, a lantern for elders, a shield for the youth. He tends to the gates where the watchers once fell, and warns of their lies with a clear ringing bell. Your pilgrim gray, our watchman in flame, your chronicles echo through ages and name.
Clear ringing bell, folks. Pilgrim's Gray Chronicles. Welcome back, fellow pilgrims. Robert Clark, your host. Great to have everybody back and listening. Gonna be a change of scenery today. I know many of you were probably expecting the Mazeroth Sky Clock Part 2, and there is a Part 2. So, no need to worry about that. However, the change of pace or gears that I'm referencing is this. After getting an email or two from some listeners and discussing some questions my wife had about the podcast, I have this tendency, apparently, to just assume that people know about certain things. And probably many of you in my listening audience do have knowledge that I take for granted, but many don't. And so, with that in mind, I wanted to go back and define what the Mazeroth is, how it operates, and all these different things before just arbitrarily jumping into the deep end of the pool by going over the constellations. We will do a part 3 where we go over the last 6 constellations. But first, I have a fairly lengthy 7-part or 7-section explanation of the Mazeroth and what it is, what it isn't, how it works mechanically, what the sun is doing, what the moon is doing, why, how it's related to God communicating things in the heavens, all these different things that you're going to want to know, and many want to know, and I wanted to address, and I probably need to run more of these shows by my wife, because she is really great at asking questions that sometimes I don't think about because I'm so busy researching and trying to type things out and put things together cohesively, logically flowing with my outline, that sometimes I get lost in what I'm doing. And I forget that somebody might want to know about something. Like, I may just make a statement and just assume in that statement that somebody knows what I'm referencing. But as my wife pointed out, sometimes somebody wants to know, well, how did you come about that statement? And I can't promise that I'm going to always have the time or wherewithal to do that. What I'm hoping is to get greater support so that at one point I can stop working my full-time job, retire from it, and just be doing this full-time so that I can have 3 long-form podcasts, the kind that I do today on Monday, also on Wednesday and Friday, and still find time maybe to do the short viewer email and top 3 stories of the week. But for now, I have to work 50 hours a week or so, be gone from the house, still do this research, still put it all together, still do music, still work with my band and the album we're doing, all these different things. So you'll forgive me if sometimes I can't always address every question, but the more you communicate with me and the more you let me know in the comments section the questions that you have, or the more you support us by spreading this podcast, by sharing it, liking it, commenting on it, supporting us through getting merchandise. We have all kinds of merchandise. Like you can buy a hat, a hoodie, a midriff hoodie, shoes, handbags, Apple cases for your phone. I mean, we have a bunch, and we're always trying to think of new things to add for you. So just keep that in mind. So with that out of the way, I don't want to bore you to death with all that. I just want to get right to it because this is pretty lengthy. So let's get right into it with not all who wander are lost. Right? But many who gaze at the stars have been misled. So tonight we take a step back before we move forward. Last week we journeyed through 6 constellations, 6 signs written in the heavens. But before we continue into the final 6, we have to answer the question many of you raised, including my wife. What exactly is the Mazeroth? Where did it come from? How do we know it belongs to God and not to astrology, Babylon, or the New Age? Because if the heavens truly declare the glory of God, then we should know exactly what they're declaring and why. So, 7 sections, starting with this one, defining the Mazeroth, the sky clock of God. So lift up your eyes. There's more up there than just twinkling lights. There's a message, a timeline, a war map, but only if you know how to read it. So before we trace the lion's path through the final constellations, we need to go back, way back, to a nearly forgotten word tucked inside the oldest book of the Bible, Job 38, 31 through 33. Can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazeroth in its season? Here, God himself is speaking, challenging Job with the mysteries of his creation. He doesn't reference animals or trees or even mountains. He references constellations by name, Pleiades, Orion, the bear and her cubs. And then he mentions the mysterious Mazeroth, a word that appears nowhere else in that form in all of Scripture, but its meaning, it stretches across the entire Bible and into the heavens themselves. So what is the Mazeroth? In Hebrew, Mazeroth refers to the constellations that appear in their seasons. Literally, a celestial ordering, not random stars, but divinely assigned positions like the numbers on a cosmic clock face. In fact, according to the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon, the term likely refers to, quote, zodiac. Perhaps meanings include the 12 signs or stations of the sun only in Job 38:32. But don't mistake this for horoscope talk, because the BDB draws a distinction, and I'm just abbreviating the book I just mentioned because I don't want to keep saying Brown Driver Briggs lexicon. So because BDB draws a distinction, it notes the zodiacal structure without attaching pagan meaning. That corruption came later, and we'll get to that. But the same root word, mazel, is still used in modern Hebrew. It's where the saying Mazel Tov comes from, literally, good constellation. So now here's the kicker. In Genesis 1:14, on day 4 of creation, God says, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." So the word for seasons, not spring, summer, fall, and winter, it's moedim, the very same word used in Leviticus 23 to describe the feasts of the Lord, divine appointments like Passover, Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Trumpets. So let's let that sink in for a second. God made the sun, moon, and stars not just to illuminate the world, but to serve as a calendar of prophecy, a timepiece of redemptive history. So what does the Mazeroth do? Well, it functions as God's celestial sky clock, and it does 3 specific things. It teaches time, where the constellations move in fixed seasonal cycles. The sun passes through 12 major signs over a year, just as the Hebrew calendar flows through 12 months. These signs mark months, years, and sacred feasts. Now, this is not mysticism. This is astronomy designed by Yahweh. And then 2, it marks prophecy. Revelation 12 describes a woman clothed with the sun and the moon at her feet and a dragon poised to devour her child. It is not just poetic. Like I said a lot of times in my first part 1 video, it describes a precise astronomical alignment involving Virgo, the sun, the moon, and the constellation Draco. And then there were the wise men, the Magi. In Matthew 2, they followed a star to find the newborn king. Not fortune tellers, but guardians of ancient astronomical prophecy, possibly carrying knowledge passed down by Daniel himself, who would have known this from his Babylonian capture and even before that. And then 3, it testifies to God's sovereignty. The heavens declare the glory of God, right? Psalm 19:1. Their line has gone out through all the earth, Psalm 19:4. The Hebrew word for line is gav, a measured line. The sky isn't chaos, it's design. Every constellation is a stroke of divine calligraphy spelling out a story. So some would still object, well, isn't that astrology? They ask. Well, let's be clear. Astrology is the corruption of God's astronomy. The Septuagint, or Greek Old Testament, translates the word Mazeroth in Job 38 as zodiakos kyklos, or the zodiacal circle, or circle of animals. And this is the same system later adopted and corrupted by Babylonians, who turned the sky into a pantheon, Egypt, who made Horus rise and set with Sirius, and Greece, who blended it into mythology and birth signs, but it didn't start with them. So early on, this clock appears to have been stolen. The pre-flood patriarchs, according to Josephus, studied the stars for divine knowledge and engraved that knowledge on 2 pillars, one of stone, one of brick, the pillars of Seth and the pre-flood sky knowledge. You may have heard the claim that the stars were known, even named, long before Babylon or Egypt carved their gods into them, but where does that idea come from? Well, we find a powerful clue in the writings of Flavius Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian whose work, Antiquities of the Jews, preserves traditions handed down through the Second Temple period. In Book 1, Chapter 2, Section 3, Josephus writes this: They also determined that the stars were the signs of future events, and upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire, and at another time by the violence and quantity of water, they made 2 pillars, the one of brick, the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both, so that if the pillar of brick was destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain and exhibit those discoveries to mankind. So, who are they? Well, Josephus tells us it was the righteous descendants of Seth, the son of Adam, and these early patriarchs, likely men like Enoch, and Methuselah, were said to have studied the stars, not for astrology, but for signs of God's handiwork in the unfolding of future events. In other words, the Mazeroth before the flood. But it wasn't just idle curiosity. According to the same account, Adam himself prophesied that the world would one day be destroyed, once by fire and once by water. And so to preserve their sacred knowledge, Seth's line constructed 2 great monuments, one of brick to withstand fire, one of stone to withstand water. This was a pre-flood redundant backup system, a prophetic time capsule, if you will, designed to carry the knowledge of the stars into a post-cataclysmic world. So who cares, right? Well, why does that matter? Well, it tells us 2 things. First, that the earliest generations had astronomical insight, likely given by God. Second, that they valued it enough to protect it from destruction, anticipating a future world that would need to remember what the heavens once declared. And here's the kicker. Josephus claims the stone pillar still existed in his day, visible in the land of Syriad, an ancient name some scholars associate with Egypt. So could it be that Egypt's obsession with sky knowledge, their zodiac, pyramids, and star charts, wasn't original, but inherited? And that's not astrology, just divine knowledge preserved in stone, waiting to be reclaimed. So after the flood, that knowledge survived in Noah's line, but when the nations gathered at Babel, they rebelled. Nimrod built a tower not just to reach heaven physically, but to seize what was written in the sky. The rebellion was about reclaiming power over divine time. When God scattered the nations, the constellations went with them, but over time, their meanings were lost. Instead of seeing the stars as God's billboard, the nations began to worship the signs themselves. Babylon created Enuma, Anu, Enlil, assigning gods and omens to constellations. Egypt engraved the Dendera zodiac, and Greece canonized it into what we now call the horoscope. Even Israel wasn't immune. In 2 Kings 23:5, King Hosea had to destroy altars where Jews were burning incense to the Mazzaroth, the idolatrous version of the Mazeroth. So, the form, 12 signs remained. The function was hijacked. So, we have this biblical Mazeroth and this pagan astrology. The Mazeroth is created by God. Astrology it corrupts it by fallen man. And then we have the Mazeroth revealing prophecy and sacred time. Pagan astrology attempts to divine personal fate. Biblical Mazeroth reinforces the authority of Yahweh. Pagan astrology replaces God with cosmic forces. The biblical Mazeroth is commended in Scripture. In pagan astrology, it is condemned in Deuteronomy 18 and 2 Kings 23. So the stars don't determine your future. They testify to the one who already knows it. Right? He's the one that wrote the story. So section 2 now, we're going to go over the sky clock in the garden, a pre-flood understanding of the Mazeroth. So there was a time when man didn't fear the stars, he read them, when the heavens weren't occulted by temples and towers, but revealed plainly in a world where the veil was thin, or maybe not there at all. So before Babel twisted the signs, before Babylon codified the zodiac and Greece personalized the stars, there was a garden. And in that garden, time didn't tick, it spoke. The first humans weren't primitive. They weren't evolving from apes. They were formed in the image of the God who made the lights in the heavens on the fourth day, not just for sight, but for signs, seasons, days, and years. The Mazeroth was there before sin, before rebellion, before Babel, and someone was watching it. So when God placed Adam in that garden, he gave him dominion over the animals, over the earth, and perhaps even over the calendar. Genesis 2:19 says, "Whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name." And that same naming authority may have extended beyond the beasts of the field and upward to the host of heaven. After all, naming is rulership. Adam was given the birthright and rulership of earth, much to certain angels' consternation. It's responsibility and stewardship. It is not hard to imagine Adam in the cool of the evening looking upward and recognizing the order his creator set above him, a celestial clockwork declaring rhythm and rest, growth and gathering, warning and wonder. And this knowledge would not have died with Adam. Scripture says he lived 930 years. That's nearly a millennium of mentorship. He would have known Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch. His son Seth was born after the fall, but still lived in the same divine light. Genesis 4:26 says, "Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord." And I don't think this was a prayer, or at least it wasn't just prayer. It may have included calendar observance, sky watching, and the beginning of ritual timekeeping, not unlike the later appointed feasts in Leviticus. In fact, ancient Jewish commentary like the Seder Olam and the Sefer Hekolot, it's supposed to be said with a thing in the throat, but I don't want to do that. If you want to pronounce it that way, great. Speak of Adam and his sons observing the cycles of light, not as mystics, but as faithful witnesses to time itself. So, and just to remind you of the pillars, we mentioned earlier, Josephus wrote that the righteous line of Seth, warned by Adam of a coming flood and a later fire, inscribed their heavenly knowledge on two pillars, one of brick and stone. So this sacred preservation shows how seriously they took what the heavens were saying. But the real transmission wasn't just carved in stone, it was passed person to person. And nowhere is that clearer than with Enoch. So Enoch, seventh from Adam, is one of the Bible's most mysterious figures. Genesis 5:24 says that Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, for God took him. But what did Enoch do before he vanished? Well, the book of Enoch, also known as First Enoch, or the Book of the Watchers, quoted directly in Jude 1:14 and 15, tells us that Enoch was shown the secrets of the heavenly calendar, the rising and setting of the sun, moon, and stars. In 1 Enoch 72 and 82 through 82, an angel named Uriel reveals to Enoch four things. 1, the four gates of the sun's path. 2, the daily variations of light and darkness. 3, the order of the stars that appear in their seasons. And 4, the division of the year into 364 days. That last number is important. It's a solar year, rounded to a perfect rhythm, distinct from the later Babylonian lunar calendar. Enoch 74:2 reads, "The sun and the stars bring in all the years exactly, so they do not advance or delay their position by a single day unto eternity." And it's not mythology, this is pre-flood precision astronomy, written, recorded, and passed on before Babel ever existed. Now, there's a bit of an oddity here that I will explain in various comments and different sections. So, the oddity is here in Genesis, and it's too clean to ignore. It says that all the days of Enoch were 365 years. This is in Genesis 5:23. Not 340, not 382, exactly 365, the same number as the days in our solar year. I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, it could be. But if you're a man appointed to record the workings of the heavens, and God stamps your lifespan with the pattern of the sun itself, I don't think that's an accident, but possibly some signature of some sort. And then the Book of Jubilees, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, expands this even further. In Jubilees 4:17 and 18, it says, "Enoch was the first among men to learn writing, knowledge, and wisdom, and who wrote down the signs of the heavens according to the order of their months in a book." But why does Jubilees matter? Because this book, written during the Second Temple period, wasn't trying to reinvent anything. It was trying to defend the original system. Jubilees rejects lunar calendars, the very ones used by Babylon and other nations, and warns that using the wrong calendar would result in missing God's appointed times. Example, Jubilees 6:36 through 38, "They will make the year begin 10 days too soon." It makes it seem as if there's some calendar war going on, and it's still going on. The Book of Jubilees makes the case that God's true feasts are tied to the sun and the stars and the 364-day cycle, originally 360 days, but I'll get to that, not the corrupted lunar system of the nations. So why does that matter? Well, if Adam saw the stars and Seth passed down their order, and Enoch recorded them by angelic instruction, and Jubilees fought to preserve that knowledge, then the Mazeroth is not a Jewish mysticism or a later invention. It is one of the oldest prophetic systems in the world, designed by God, stewarded by the righteous, and still ticking above our heads every single night. So the stars aren't speaking a new message, they're still speaking the original one. The heavens declare the glory of God, and that's exactly what the enemy tried to steal next. So why does God seem to favor the sun over the moon? Or does he use both? That probably needs to be cleared up, because Genesis 1:16, chapter 1, verse 16, says God made both the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. Notice they're both lights, not one reflecting the other. So Psalm 104:19 says, he made the moon to mark the seasons. But Jubilees and First Enoch seem suspicious of lunar calendars. So it's not that God didn't create or intend to use the moon, it's that post-Babel cultures corrupted timekeeping by depending exclusively or incorrectly on the moon, which drifted them off God's fixed appointed times. Moedim, M-O-E-D-I-M. Look it up. God's design used both. The sun to govern the year and the days, solstices, equinoxes, and feasts, the moon to govern months and night. Passover is always on a full moon. So the stars Mazeroth to validate and stabilize the whole cycle. But what happens when you only follow the moon? Well, you drift. A lunar year is 354 days, while a solar year is 365. Over time, this means feasts would no longer align with seasons, a direct violation of Genesis 1:14 system of signs and seasons. Jubilee 6:36-38 warns, for there will be those who will assuredly make observations of the moon, and they will make the year 364 days only, and they will make an error in it, and all the children of Israel will forget the feast and walk according to the feast of the Gentiles. So Jubilees is not anti-moon, it's anti-misuse of the moon to replace or override the sun and star-based system God gave. A second issue, another spot that some of you might notice or see tension is that the 364-day year in Enoch and Jubilees reflects an idealized calendar or a prophetic or liturgical year used in temple contexts, especially among the Essenes. It fits perfectly into 52 weeks of 7 days. 364 divided by 7 equals 52, with no leap days needed. Scholars believe they added a day of remembrance or intercalary day to realign with the solar cycle, 365.24 days. So Enoch's 365-year lifespan may represent this completion of the solar cycle, a symbol of fullness. So rather than there's being some seeming contradiction of symbolic layering, 364 equals the perfect liturgical year. 365 equals the full cycle of God's heavenly pattern, like a man whose life mirrors the sky. We're also going to go into some of the original stuff before the flood, and it being 360 days. But for now, let's stay on track with some other things. So there's a source many haven't heard, but the early Jews knew pretty well, within the Book of Jubilees, preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls and revered by the Essenes. It claims to be a revelation given to Moses by an angel on Mount Sinai, explaining the division of time from creation onward. In Jubilees 4:17 and 18, it says, Enoch was the first among men to learn writing, and so on. I mentioned that one earlier. And in Jubilee 6, it issues a warning that there will be those who assuredly make observations of the moon and err, like I mentioned earlier also. So, God clearly created both the sun and the moon, right? Made the moon to mark the seasons. But what Jubilees is warning against isn't the moon itself, but completely relying on it only. Because the Babylonians and other Gentile nations built their calendars entirely on these lunar cycles that are only 354 days long, which drifts the feasts off the seasons unless regularly adjusted. So Jubilees and Enoch both argue that God's calendar was anchored first by the sun and stars, with the moon as a complement, not a replacement. Why? Because Genesis 1:14 tells us the lights in the heavens were created for signs and seasons and for days and years. And that's where 364 comes in. That 364-day year divides, like I said, perfectly into 52 weeks, 4 seasons, 12 months of 30 days, and seasonal markers. It is a prophetic sacred year, mathematically flawless, liturgically precise. But you might say, well, wasn't Enoch's lifespan 365 years? And yes, and far from being a contradiction, it may be the final touch, right? Because one day beyond the 364-year full solar year, the life of Enoch mirrored of the sky a human echo of the Mazeroth. So when Jubilees promotes a 364-day year, it's not denying reality, it's preserving a sacred template, one that Babylon tried to overwrite with lunar mysticism. So the fight wasn't over math, it was over God's timing versus man's. Now, in section 3, we find that this is hijacked at Babel and corrupted. They didn't just defy heaven, they replicated it, and then they reassigned it. In Ziggurat's Towers of Imitation, not Ascent, Genesis 11:4 says, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens." So, to clarify this, they weren't trying to physically reach the stars. I mean, they weren't stupid. The Hebrew phrase Rosh Bashalmim implies alignment with or dedication to the heavens, not architectural ambition, but cosmic mimicry. The tower was not a ladder to heaven, it was a ritual machine. In Mesopotamian culture, ziggurats were not temples themselves. They were the platforms for temples, elevated to reflect heaven on earth. These stepped structures were blue glazed, usually at the top to mirror the sky, often mapped with star signs. For example, the Etemenanki, the house that is the foundation of heaven and earth in Babylon, about the 6th century BC, associated by tradition with the Tower of Babel. The top shrine was dedicated to Marduk. Fragments from the Esigil tablet describe its dimensions and alignment with celestial phenomenon. The Ziggurat of Ur, 2100 BC in Sumeria, built for Nana, the moon god. Archaeologists have found alignments with lunar cycles, suggesting it functioned as a kind of ritual calendar. And then the Ziggurat Eschoga Zambil Elam, about 1250 BC, contains temples for multiple gods, including Inshushinak. Its uppermost level was also likely aligned with planetary positions. The tops of these towers were, again, often painted blue with crushed lapis lazuli to symbolize the firmament. So when God confused the languages at Babel, he did more than create nations. He divided spiritual territories. Deuteronomy 13:8. When the Most High divided up the nations, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the numbers of the sons of God. Each nation, now with a lesser Elohim over it, fallen or otherwise, took a piece of the sky clock with them, but quickly rewrote the meanings. Where did these new meanings come from? Well, according to 1 Enoch 15:8-10, the spirits of the Nephilim, born of rebellious watchers, remained on earth as unclean spirits after the flood. But what of the watchers themselves? Jude 1:6 and 2 Peter 2:4 say they were bound in chains under darkness, awaiting judgment. But some scholars, like Michael Heiser and even Derek Gilbert, argue that not all were imprisoned at once, and I agree with that. It might have just been the leaders of it, the ones who created the most egregious sins, perhaps, but especially those involved in a second incursion post-flood, hinted at in Genesis 6:4, where it says, and also afterward. So these beings may have infiltrated early post-flood culture, reintroduced corrupted celestial knowledge, claimed the constellations as their domains. Who knows? In fact, Enoch 9:6-7 records humanity worshiping the names of these fallen ones again, a practice that spread across every ancient empire. And where did they go when the flood came? Possibly into the earth or into the stars. Not as far away places, but maybe some sort of portals in the sky. I don't know. I've never been to a star, and neither has anyone else. Anyway, so the forms remained, the meanings were hijacked. Each watcher or spirit or lesser god of the nations began to claim a piece of the Mazeroth. Here are just a few examples. Taurus, the bull of power and lust. In Sumeria, the bull of heaven was sent by Ishtar to punish Gilgamesh. In Egypt, it became the sacred Apis bull, linked to Ptah, and later Osiris. And in Canaan, Baal worship in bull form, tied to storms and fertility. So bulls symbolized unrestrained strength, fertility, and the divine masculine, corrupted echoes of sacrificial imagery. Libra, the scales of legal domination. In Egypt, the scales are found in the weighing of the heart seen in the Book of the Dead, where Ma'at determines eternal fate. Libra was associated with order, but through fear and works, not grace. And this reflects a twisted version of the balance of mercy and justice in God's law. Leo, the solar throne. In Babylon, Leo was tied to Shamash, god of the sun and justice. In Persia, lion symbology was used in royal regalia to represent solar kingship. Even today, Leo is associated with dominance, ego, and solar radiance. God's lion is the Lion of Judah. Babel's lion wears the sun like a crown, a counterfeit Messiah. Virgo, the virgin of the heavens. Ishtar, Babylon. Inanna and Sumer. Astarte and Canaan. And Isis, Egypt, all share aspects of Virgo. The queen of heaven, giver of life, judge of the underworld. In Greece, Virgo became Demeter, or Athena, linked to harvest and war. Virgo was once a sign of the coming seed. In Genesis 3:15, Babel turned her into the bringer of rebirth without a redeemer. Babylonian literature was kind of a codification of the zodiac. The Enuma Anu Enlil, Babylon's massive omen-based text, gives us some evidence of that. Over 7,000 celestial omens, signs linked to floods, famine, royal succession, and war. Stars were no longer clocks, they were tools of control. The system became the basis for Chaldean astrology, later adopted by Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then you have Egypt's Dendera zodiac with stargates and afterlives. The Dendera zodiac carved into the ceiling of the Hathor temple in Dendera, Egypt, dated about 50 BC, the Ptolemaic period, and it contains all 12 zodiac signs, planetary deities and orbits, and depictions of Nut, the goddess of the sky, swallowing stars. So scholars believe it was used in resurrection rites, mapping the path of the soul through the cosmic portals guarded by gods. The stars no longer spoke of the Messiah's coming, they spoke of rebirth through gnosis and ritual, hidden knowledge, and so on. Then we have Greece and birth horoscopes. And that's what we're familiar with today. Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos in the 2nd century AD defined personal horoscopes. The 12 signs were used to predict character, fate, and success based on the moment of birth, depending on what zodiac sign you were in. This solidified the idea that you are what the sky says you are. But contrast this with Psalm 8, 4, and 5. What is man that you are mindful of him? You made him a little lower than the Elohim. So God says we are not defined by the stars. We are defined by our relationship to the creator of the stars. So again, the original Mazeroth, 12 signs tell the Messiah story. The corrupted zodiac, the 12 signs tell man's fate. The original, used for Moedim and prophecy. The corrupted, used for horoscopes, war, and omens. The original tied to Yahweh's calendar. The corrupted tied to gods, rituals, reincarnation, and other ridiculousness. The first, original, points to redemption. The other, your own entertainment and self-exaltation, is what it points to. You will be as gods. It all points to you instead of what God wanted, which is what all of this is always all about, right? There's one true path with God, and then all of us want to decide for ourselves apart from God, what is our reality? And we've turned the world into a big cesspool of poo. Anyway, the signs were reassigned, the names were changed, but the sky has not forgotten the story it was meant to tell. The War of the Heavens was never about astrology. It was about authority. Whose authority? Ours or God's? So, I'm going to play you a little tune while I get a drink because my throat is getting a little bit cranky. So enjoy this little guitar work thing I put together, and I will be right back. All right. For those who might be wondering, that is just a Superior Drummer 3 drum track with me soloing over it using Bagram Digital's BDM pack. It's a series of Marshall amplifiers that are all just digital and like they dial in a perfect tone. And I'm not a shredder, so I can't play super fast. But, some of my favorite guitarists like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, I can do their slower stuff. So I hope you enjoy that piece. I've got another one that I'll put out towards the end. I hope you enjoy that one too. I just like throwing together quickie little 2 to 3 minute songs because they're quick to do. And I have all kinds of ideas bubbling in my head that are just bursting to get out. That's why I make music. And you can check out our band page at pilgrimsgray.com. But that won't be on it. That's just something I threw together for the podcast called Skyfire. So section 4, we're going to now get into some of the functionality. Now that I've had something to drink to calm my throat. How the Mazeroth actually works, right? Every clock tells time, but this one tells eternity. So by now, we've seen the stars corrupted, renamed, repurposed by the nations, but the structure they hijacked wasn't theirs. What they tried to control was originally built by God and still functions on divine operating system. So let's now explore how the Mazeroth works, what it means, and how its movements reflect the gospel timeline, biblical prophecy, and the seasons of redemption. So the heavenly calendar wheel, 12 plus 36 equals 48. Now you might be thinking, what in the world are you talking about? Well, at its core, the Mazeroth is a sky wheel, a great circle of stars divided into 12 major constellations through which the sun travels over the course of the year. Embedded within each of those 12 signs are 3 decans, minor constellations or companions, making a total of 36 supporting figures. The 12 primary signs mark the major phases of the redemptive story. The 36 decans add detailed support and depth to each phase. So add the 4 cardinal constellations, often associated with the 4 living creatures in Revelation, Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, and Scorpio is the eagle, and you begin to see a multi-layered timekeeping system. So in that, we have the sun's monthly progression. The sun moves through each major constellation roughly once per month, completing its circuit annually, a pattern hinted at in Psalm 19, 4-6, where it says, "In the heavens God has pitched a tent for the sun. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other." This movement correlates with God's appointed times, or moedim, in Leviticus 23. The feasts weren't randomly chosen. They aligned with celestial patterns visible to the faithful. In this system, Virgo, late summer, begins the story, a virgin with wheat in her hand. Leo, late summer, early fall, ends it and is the conquering lion. That is seed to scepter, Genesis 3:15 to Revelation 19, laid out across the sky every year. Then we have each constellation telling a chapter of the gospel, not as myth, but as encrypted prophecy made visible in the heavens from the very beginning. Right? So we have Virgo, a virgin with child, right? Which is the birth of the Messiah, is Isaiah 7:14, Luke 1:27. And then we have Libra, the scales, which is atonement, the price paid, Romans 3:25. We have Scorpio, the serpent, right? Stinger, satanic betrayal and crucifixion. We have Sagittarius, the bow aimed, conquering gospel spreads, right? Then we have Capricorn, the goatfish, death and resurrection imagery. Then we have Aquarius, the water bearer, the outpouring of the Spirit, Acts chapter 2, which that was our first episode. We covered those things, if you recall. Then Pisces, 2 fish, Jews and Gentiles gathered. Aries, the ram, the lamb slain in John 1:29. Taurus, the charging bull, coming judgment. Gemini, the twins, the Messiah's dual role, suffering servant and conquering king. Cancer, which is a protective shell, the gathered flock in his arms. Leo, the lion, the returning king, Revelations 5:5, 19, 11-16, and of course the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So if you note, this isn't astrology, this is pre-flood astronomy built to point towards a singular Redeemer, not to define your personality or predict your Tuesday. The decans, or the gospel supporting cast, each of the 36 decans adds clarity to all of this. For example, under Virgo, you find Coma, a woman with a child. Under Aries, you will find Cassiopeia, a bride made beautiful. Under Leo, you find Hydra the serpent, Crater the cup of wrath, and Corvus the raven, the enemies beneath the lion's feet. Those decans aren't arbitrary, they're the visual echoes of the seed war, the messianic lineage, the judgment of evil, and the exaltation of the bride. And in Revelation 12, a celestial sign, where it says, "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head." It's not poetic license, again. And I only mention this so often because when somebody wants to dismiss something out of Scripture, they always allegorize it or claim it's poetry. And it may very well be poetry, but I think it's more than that. So this is an astronomical event. On September 23rd, 2017, an alignment occurred where the sun was in Virgo, clothed in the sun, is what that expression means. The moon was at her feet. Jupiter, the king planet, had completed a retrograde inside Virgo, symbolizing a birth. You can look these things up. 12 stars from Leo plus Mercury, Mars, and Venus formed a crown. Now, whether this was a one-time prophetic marker or a part of a larger pattern, the Bible is clearly comfortable using sky signs as spiritual metaphors with physical counterparts. Oftentimes, when something like that happens in the sky, you see the symbol taking place, right? But you don't always perceive in the physical world what it meant right away. Because oftentimes, something will happen in the world of spirit, in the sky, in the second heavens, the third heavens, and through a process, it begins to take place here on earth, sometimes immediately or sometimes over time. Just like when Adam and Eve were told, "Dying, you will surely die if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." Well, if you didn't notice, when they ate, they didn't drop dead right in that moment. They did spiritually. They were separated from God's spirit and no longer connected to him that way, and thus lost much of their ability to perceive certain things that are spiritual. But they didn't immediately die. That process of death began not only for them, but also in the world. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's not always that way. Sometimes the effect is immediate. And unfortunately, we don't always know. There are some things that only God is going to be aware of. And he can or cannot, or not that he cannot, but he will choose to whom he will reveal certain things to and who he won't. But faithful people watch and look and learn and discern, right? So, by the way, this view is nothing new. E.W. Bollinger in The Witness of the Stars, which, by the way, I am trying to include a link in my videos now so that you can, one way you can support my channel now is in my genius. I have figured out how to add links to certain products that are related to my videos so that if you desire to get a copy of this book, which I highly recommend, even though it was written in 1893, it doesn't matter. It's a great book, as somebody pointed out in one of the YouTube comments. I highly recommend it. It's not expensive. You can get a softback or a hardback. And I only get a small commission off it. But if you're going to buy the book, please use my link. And that way you can support the channel in that way, right? So, anyway, E.W. Bollinger in The Witness of the Stars argued that the Mazeroth was a pre-flood revelation passed down through Seth's line and preserved in Egyptian, Hebrew, and Arabic tradition. Later corrupted, but still recoverable. J.R. Church in Hidden Prophecies in the Psalms, which I will also include a link somewhere in the video. Anyway, in the Hidden Prophecies in the Psalms, suggested that the 12 tribes, apostles, constellations, and months form a layered prophetic calendar synced with Scripture, history, and the skies. Another excellent read. Even early Christian astronomers preserved the structure. The Nazarenes and Essenes based calendar calculations on solar patterns reflected in the constellations. The Dead Sea Scrolls show scholar calendars tied to temple service and heavenly watches in First Enoch and Jubilees. Church fathers like Clement of Alexandria and Theophilus of Antioch referenced constellations as evidences of God's design, not just random clusters. And it's not mysticism, it was sacred rhythm, like a clock designed by God in the sky. The sun keeps the cycle of the year. The moon keeps the months and feast timing. And the stars declare the narrative arc from Genesis to Revelation. And the enemy knew this. That's why the zodiac was corrupted, or the Mazeroth. That's why the Watchers taught false star knowledge. That's why modern culture treats the stars as either entertainment or superstition instead of prophecy. But the sky is still working, and the problem is we just stopped listening and didn't properly preserve things. It reminds me of the One Ring in Tolkien's work being lost out of knowledge, and people ignored it until it began to affect their lives in the Third Age, right? So, Section 5, why Jesus didn't reject the sky clock. Well, if the stars were corrupted, the Word would have said so, right? For some, talk of constellations and prophecy makes them nervous. They imagine horoscopes, zodiac signs, and crystal ball nonsense. And that's how I used to be. I used to think the same thing until looking into this. But here's the question you have to ask. If the Mazeroth, the divine sky calendar, was corrupted beyond use, wouldn't the Messiah have condemned it? It's pretty important. But he didn't. In fact, he affirmed it, and those who sought him followed it, right? I think of the Magi and the star, Matthew 2:2. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his what? Star in the east, and have come to worship him. So, the Magi weren't pagan dabblers. They were scholar priests, likely trained in the astronomical wisdom of Daniel from Babylonian exile. They were watching the sky for signs based on prophetic expectation. They weren't condemned. They were led by heaven to the feet of the King of Kings. So some scholars suggest the star they followed may have been a conjunction of Jupiter and Regulus, the king planet and king star, or a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Venus, and Leo, the tribe of Judah, or something entirely supernatural, layered onto the natural markers. That's my preferred explanation. They saw the billboard, they faithfully recognized it and knew about it and went in that direction. And wouldn't you know it, God sends a supernatural light to guide them to the exact specific spot. How? I don't know. Perhaps there are portals or gateways mentioned in ancient texts that may be being restrained right now, but maybe they weren't then. And perhaps this led them there because they faithfully witnessed what God had put in the sky. So often, our Lord blesses people who are paying attention, being discerning, trusting Him with what He said. And when they do that, He gives them more to trust with. Does that make sense? I know that's been the way in my life. When I look to God and His Word as my foundation and my filter, He trusts you with more information. It's a process. You don't just get blasted with a bunch of information. It's a process that takes time, as many of you are probably aware. Either way, the sign was in the heavens, and they understood its meaning because they were watching the Mazeroth. Heaven wasn't silent. It was pointing to the birth of its maker. Then we have Jesus and the signs in the sky, Luke 21:25-28. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And now when these things begin to happen, stand and lift up your heads because your redemption draws near. This is the Messiah himself, God in the flesh, man and God. And what does he tell his disciples? To look up, to watch the signs, and to read the heavens. He never once says, the stars are defiled, ignore them. Instead, he affirms that Yahweh's sky clock is still ticking and that we should be paying attention, especially in the last days. We have a celestial blueprint in Revelation, right? The book of Revelation is soaked in astronomical imagery. Revelation 6:13, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its late figs. Revelation 8:12, a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars. Revelation 12:1 and 2, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars. The early church fathers, including Hippolytus, Victorinus, and Clement of Alexandria, they read these as heavenly signs with spiritual consequences. They didn't see the stars as demonic. They saw them as testifiers fulfilling what Psalm 19:1 already declared. They declare the glory of God. And then even Enoch in the calendar of light. In 1 Enoch 72 through 82, the angel Uriel reveals the calendar of heaven to Enoch. 364-day cycles, gates of the sun and moon, and proper timing of sacred days. And though Enoch isn't scripture for most modern Bibles, though it is in Eastern Orthodox churches, never taken out. At least first Enoch wasn't, the Book of the Watchers. Either way, Enoch was quoted by Jude in the New Testament. Jude chapter 1, 14 and 15. It was revered by Second Temple Jews and found in abundance amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it was the second most copied scroll. Only second to maybe Isaiah. I can't remember. Anyway, never condemned by Jesus or his apostles. In fact, Jesus used a title out of the Book of Enoch as his primary way to refer to himself. Many of you are already in your mind saying, no, it was Daniel, it was Daniel. No, it was not. The term in Daniel says one like a son of man coming on the clouds, describing him as human in appearance, not as a title. Only Enoch defines the Son of Man as a being who at the end of days will judge the earth in righteousness. There's only Enoch refers to the Son of Man, not as a human description, but as the title of the Lord of Spirits in flesh, as a king, as a future judge. Only Enoch. So it's interesting, that despite their many confrontations with false doctrine, they never condemned this particular book. And everybody knew what he was referencing. He wasn't saying that he was a human. I mean, that was obvious. When he said Son of Man, he was referring to the title referred to in the Book of Enoch. So early Messianic communities likely understood the Enochian calendar better than most churches today. If this calendar had been abominable, wouldn't the Lord of Spirits, Yahweh himself, have told his son to speak against it? But instead he said, watch the sky, look for the signs, lift up your heads. So why does that matter? Well, in a world trained to ignore the sky or filter it through horoscopes, science fiction, and ridiculousness, we forget that our Redeemer wrote his story in the stars. The wise men found him by it. The prophets referenced it. The apostles didn't reject it, and Jesus pointed us toward it. So what Babylon corrupted, Yahweh created. What the zodiac hides, the Mazeroth reveals. And what began in Virgo will end in Leo. So why does this matter now? Well, if Jesus in Matthew 24:43 says this, if you knew what hour the thief was coming, you would what? You would stay awake. So we've seen that the heavens were created. By the way, if I didn't mention it, we're on section 6 with one section to go. We've seen that the heavens were created from more than light. They were made to tell time, reveal truth, and warn of what's coming. But in our modern world, the sky has been reduced to background noise, either idolized through horoscopes or ignored through scientism. But Scripture says otherwise. Right? Remember, Genesis 1:14, let them be for signs and for seasons. And then Psalm 19, day after day they pour forth speech. Luke 21:25, there will be signs and the sun, moon, and stars. And the sky is still talking, and we're supposed to listen. Right? Is it still ticking or not? Now, here's what we know. The sun rules the day and the cycle of the year. The moon determines appointed feasts. The Mazeroth, the wheel of 12 constellations, appears to overlay the redemptive story, and that means we're not left blind. Yes, knowledge may be scattered, but fragments do remain, and the Spirit can guide the faithful who seek. So, what should we look for? What specific sky signs do we watch for? So let's move past vague symbolism and focus on real observable events, the kind that align with biblical patterns and prophetic warnings. So one, like unusual celestial alignments, especially in Virgo and Leo. Revelation 12 points to Virgo, the Virgin, as a key end-time marker. Some believe the September 23rd, 2017 alignment, Virgo clothed in the sun, moon at her feet, 12-star crown, was a prophetic sign. Obviously not of the rapture or anything like that, but of some sort of prophetic season beginning. And I would say things have gotten pretty crazy since 2012 and even crazier since 2017. It's almost as if, there's these warning things going on that say, hey, I know you think it's crazy, but guess what? It's going to get crazier. Be prepared. Like warning shots before the final explosion. So what should you look for? Well, you should look for Jupiter retrograding in Virgo again. Triple conjunctions involving king planets like Jupiter and Regulus. Venus and Mars interactions often are linked to war and deception. And then 2, we have blood moons on feast days. Joel 2:31. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Acts 2 confirms this quote as end times relevant. In 2014 and 15, we had a tetrad of blood moons occurring, all on biblical feast days, Passover, Tabernacles, and again the following year. Now, while not final signs, they appeared to kind of be a wake-up call. Another thing to look for, upcoming lunar eclipses landing on feast dates. Solar eclipses crossing sacred lands or intersecting old biblical paths, as they did in 2024. Those eclipse paths forming an X over America. Don't think that just because nothing happened right on that day, that something didn't happen that you didn't perceive that will slowly take place here in the actual physical world. And then 3, meteor showers, star falls, and strange planetary activity. Revelation speaks repeatedly of stars falling and cosmic disturbances. The Greek word aster can mean meteor, comet, or flaming celestial body. Watch for meteor showers coinciding with feast days or major political religious shifts in Israel. Also watch the Perseids, the Leonids, and the Draconids. Sudden, unexpected comets visible to the naked eye. We don't really know what they are. Yeah, NASA tells us and other things. But the reality is they can't be trusted, right? So just keep your eyes peeled because nobody truly knows necessarily what they are. And we should be watching for near-Earth asteroid passes with symbolic timing. 4, false signs that mimic true ones. Jesus warned of lying signs and wonders in Matthew 24:24. That could include AI-generated cosmic phenomena, NASA deceptions and media-pushed space narratives, alien contact as a cover for fallen watcher activity. We should be discerning. Just because it's in the sky doesn't mean it's from God. And we should compare all things to Scripture and God's redemptive timeline, but you have to know it. And the only way to do that is by reading Scripture and studying it in conjunction with things like this. And we need to be knowledgeable about seasons over dates, because Jesus said in Matthew 24:36, no one knows the day or the hour, but you will know the season. And I'm not a date setter, and none of us be date setters, but we are called to be watchmen. Just because you don't know the exact hour and day a storm's going to hit doesn't mean you can't see it coming over the horizon. And in 1 Thessalonians 5:4, Paul says, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. That means the sky clock and the word can still guide the faithful if we're paying attention. So, with that in mind, you have to know that if there's an enemy to this, he's going to hide the clock. Because if people knew the season, if they saw the signs in place, if they realized the time is also up, or time is almost up, they'd repent. Some, more than normal, right? They'd get ready. They'd wake up. Some of them. Some of them won't, of course. Some will never wake up. But if the enemy convinces the world that the stars are random, that it's just astrology, there's nothing up there but empty space, and you're just one more insignificant gnat in a gigantic, ever-expanding, eternal universe, well, then what do you care, Then his deception thrives, and a people who can't read the sky are very easy to ground, aren't they? And very easy to discourage and make you feel helpless, as if nothing matters, including morality. Why be moral? The only purpose in doing so at that time is trying not to wind up in jail, right? But I mean, as far as it mattering to you in a moral sense, self-preservation is the only thing going for you at that point, right? Well, let's proceed to Section 7, the mechanics of the Mazeroth, how God's sky clock actually ticks. Because that's the big one that my wife was really asking about. She wanted to know the inner workings of the clock and just what does it do. But before that, I need another drink of water. And so I've got one more song to play for you before we wrap things up and play our outro song. Here we go. All right. Like I said, I can't play fast. I'm not a shredder. But I hope you enjoy the little melodies I come up with. So, the final section. Yay. It's one of the longer ones. Because when my wife asks questions, they're good. Ain't no doubt about it. That's why I thought I was done writing all this Sunday. And then I was telling my wife about it. And she started asking me questions while we were at my mom's for Mother's Day. And I could answer some of them, but some of them, I was like, you know what? There are probably other people thinking the same thing, and I need to include this information. So section 7 is the longest, but I really wanted to cover as much as possible of the queries that my wife came up with because they're important. And she should really be doing this podcast, but she doesn't. She doesn't really like social media, and she just wouldn't want to do it. I've tried to persuade her to come on the show. So if any of you would like to meet my wife on the show, please comment in the comments section so I can persuade her. Others might want to hear her and pick her brain apart and hear what she thinks too, because she's a smarty and a cutie. So with that being said, let us move on to finish this up, because this is a long video or a long podcast today, but it's important. So, this is something that needed to be done before moving on to the other 6 constellations. And we might even approach part 3 with a bit more of that in mind. And I'll try to be more mindful that some things can be confusing and without proper foundational information being laid out logically beforehand. I can't just assume that people know certain things. And sometimes I do that, like when I'm teaching guitar, which I haven't done in forever, but I remember trying to teach people how to play the guitar. And oftentimes I just jump into it and the person is like, I don't even know how to tune this thing. And I'm like, oh, okay. Sometimes I forget foundational things. Anyway, I can't just assume, but let's move on. So it's not just that the heavens declare, it's that they do. They do declare it like clockwork. So we've walked through the Mazeroth's message. We've watched the stars tell the story. So now let's break down how it all works so that no one's left guessing. 1, how does the sun move through the constellations? Well, we've mentioned some of this before, but let's go over it again just so that we have more detail, okay? The sun appears to move across the sky along a fixed celestial path called the ecliptic, the invisible line drawn through the 12 constellations of the Mazeroth. So over the course of 1 year, the sun appears to pass through all 12 primary constellations of the Mazeroth. It spends roughly 30 days in each sign, aligning with the concept of biblical months and God's use of 30-day cycles and calendars like those seen in Jubilees and Enoch. Now, this creates a 360-day cycle, later adjusted to 365 with intercalary days, a pattern preserved in Enoch's 364-day calendar and early temple priestly systems that we mentioned earlier. So no, the sun doesn't pass through all constellations in a single 24-hour period. It takes a full year, and each month corresponds to one sign of the Mazeroth. Does that make sense? So, the obvious thing many people are probably thinking right now is, what about the calendar discrepancy from 360 to 365 in a quarter day? Well, you may have noticed we referenced 360 or 364-day years, even though our modern solar year is roughly 365.25 days, which is why every 4 years, that quarter, we have to add one. So where's the missing time? Well, in ancient Hebrew and Enochian systems, the ideal year was seen as 360 days, 12 months of 30 days each, a clean, ordered design reflecting divine symmetry. That structure shows up repeatedly. In Genesis 7:11 through 8:4, it shows the flood lasting exactly 150 days across 5 months, 30 days per month. By the way, if you haven't heard Derek Gilbert, or maybe even others, mention the stings of the creatures in the book of Revelation, that also lasts 150 days. And I'm absolutely positive those two are connected. So, Daniel 7 and Revelation 11 through 13 use 1,260 days, which equals 42 months, which equals 3.5 years. Again, 30-day months. But after the fall, and especially post-flood, something changed. Scholars believe that one of two things happened. Either the Earth's rotation or orbit subtly shifted, extending the year, or some sort of cosmic disturbance, perhaps related to divine judgment, altered the rhythm of time itself. So, I happen to think that somehow the flood disturbed things and the firmament. The windows of heaven were open. Things have happened in the Old Testament that could have put this thing off, including in Joshua, where the sun literally stood still in the sky, right? So something definitely changed. I don't think anybody can 100% put their finger on it. Either way, it resulted in a solar year now lasting 365 and a quarter day, and not the original 360. So to correct for this, the book of Enoch, 74, chapters 74 through 75, explains how the priests used a 364-day solar calendar, carefully inserting intercalary days, or seasonal gate days, at the 4 turning points, or solstices and equinoxes, to preserve order. These 4 days were not part of the regular weeks. They were added as transition days and were considered sacred marker days. The Dead Sea Scrolls priestly calendars also use this system, treating the year as 364 days with 4 quarterly adjustments to sync with the seasons. Later, in pagan systems... Oh, well, how about that? The sky is speaking. I don't know if you could hear that, but that was thunder. So, sorry for that distraction. I lost my place here. Oh yeah, Dead Sea Scrolls, priestly calendars. Later, in pagan systems like the Roman Julian and Gregorian calendars, leap years and solstices were secularized, but the original purpose was still to keep track of God's timing. So, the 360-day structure reflects original divine order. The 364-day model reflects post-fall adjustment. The 365 and a quarter day reality reflects God's ongoing precision, even in a broken world. So, lost, stolen, scattered. We have the Mazeroth after Eden, right? God didn't just write in scrolls, he wrote in stars. And somebody stole the ink. The heavens were not just made to dazzle, they were made to teach. Genesis 1:14 said, the lights in the firmament were created for these signs, seasons, days, and years, but this wasn't just a calendar, it was a celestial revelation system, a living, turning prophecy wheel above our heads, and it was given first to the righteous. Enoch, Seth, in the original sky map, according to ancient sources, including Josephus, the Book of Jubilees, and 1st Enoch, the earliest patriarchs studied the heavens diligently. They understood the movements of the sun and the moon. They divided the heavens into portions of light and darkness. They passed down their knowledge of the 364-day solar calendar, which would later be embedded in the priestly cycles at Qumran. Josephus writes that Seth's descendants discovered the wisdom of the heavenly bodies and engraved it on 2 great pillars, like we mentioned before, right, to survive the coming flood. Now, these weren't altars to worship the stars. They were time capsules, encoded with the structure of God's sky clock left behind for the faithful to reclaim. So, the question would be, do the constellations move also as the sun's moving? And what about Polaris? Well, from the stars from our perspective, move nightly from east to west due to the rotation of the firmament or heavens around a fixed point, Polaris, the North Star. Now, many of you might be saying, what is he talking about? I am not a heliocentrist. So I believe the Earth is either geocentric or we have the true Earth, which is some sort of flat stationary plane. I'll leave you to decide whatever. Regardless, the sky clock is still out there. So Polaris, the North Star, it is located nearly directly above the North Pole and appears to stay fixed in place, making it a symbol of God's unchanging throne. Isaiah 14:13 states, I will sit on the Mount of Assembly, where? In the far north. So the rest of the stars, including the Mazeroth, rotate around Polaris like the hands of a multi-ringed celestial clock. I put a picture of that in the sky as part of the posting to YouTube and Spreaker and Spotify and so on. Meanwhile, the sun and moon travel across the sky along the ecliptic, which cuts through the 12 constellations of the Mazeroth. The stars return to nearly the same positions each season, allowing ancient people to know what time of year it was by which constellation rose at dawn or dusk. So this is why the constellations shift gradually throughout the year, and why Virgo always rises in late summer and Leo always precedes the fall feasts. So many ancient sources, both biblical and extra-biblical, point to the north as the direction of God's throne. Isaiah 14:13, like we just said. I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly in the far north. Psalm 48:2 calls Mount Zion the city of the great king on the sides of the north. Job 26:7 says he stretches out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. So in these passages, the north is not merely a compass point. It's the axis of spiritual orientation, the place of the divine court. So now consider the aurora borealis, the swirling living curtain of emerald, sapphire, and violet light visible only in the northern skies. And I don't think that is a poetic coincidence. You look at Ezekiel 1:26-28, where Ezekiel saw a throne like sapphire surrounded by fire, lightning, and radiance. John in Revelation saw a rainbow like an emerald encircling God's throne in Revelation 4:2-6. It's interesting, the colors of God's throne room seem to match the colors of the aurora, the north, which Polaris never abandons, and maybe the gateway between realms. Who knows? Just conjecturing there, but it's an interesting thought, right? Mount Nigra, or Mount Meru, ancient mythologies across the world speak of a sacred central mountain, right? A place where heaven touches earth. Mount Meru in Vedic cosmology and Mount Nigra in medieval maps and early cosmographies. Cosmographies. Holy cow. My mouth is tired. The Hebrew concept of Zaphon, the hidden north, and then Plato's Atlantis, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, again suggesting a central origin point. Many believe this cosmic mountain was located at or near the North Pole, a site now heavily restricted, shrouded in military secrecy and forbidden to civilians. Why can't ordinary explorers go to the North Pole? Do you think they were really that concerned about your safety? Doesn't seem to me like they could care one way or the other if we're dead or not. Why are GPS and flight routes diverted? Why is it even, I know they'll say cold weather, but I don't buy those explanations. And why is it even in the age of satellites and selfies, this one location is always seemingly out of reach? Some believe the North Pole houses more than ice. Maybe a sealed gate, a spiritual axis, or even the former seat of the sons of God. That mountain of the assembly. If the Mazeroth is a celestial wheel, perhaps Polaris is its hub, and what lies beneath it is the reason Lucifer tried to seize the north. From Enoch's pillars to Polaris's unwavering gaze, the ancients knew the heavens were not passive. They were oriented toward the north, anchored in prophetic geometry, built to show the return of the king. Even if Babylon, Rome, and modern cartographers tried to hide the alignment, the stars still turn and the throne still shines and the north still whispers of his return. You can fake a date, but you can't fake the sky, right? So as the sun travels its appointed path along the ecliptic, it's not just making laps through constellations, it's keeping time with God's feasts. And this is more than calendar trivia. It's the architectural backbone of the biblical year, anchored by 2 equinoxes in the feast they support. Passover in the spring, tabernacles in the fall. They're not just agricultural festivals, they are prophetic markers, tied directly to the heavens above and portals unseen. Think of them as 2 great hinges. Why these 2? Well, because they bookend the redemptive story, the first and second coming of the Messiah. Passover, Exodus 12:2, marks the beginning of the year. This month shall be your beginnings of the months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. This feast begins in the month of Aviv, during the spring equinox, when day and night are equal. It commemorates Israel's deliverance, and prophetically, it aligns with the Lamb of God being slain. Tabernacles in Leviticus 23:33 through 43 is tied to the fall equinox, and it represents the dwelling of God with man. It looks forward to Messiah's return in millennial reign and permanent reign. Zechariah 14:16 says all nations will go to Jerusalem after the final judgment to celebrate tabernacles. So these 2 feast markers, one in spring, one in fall, divide the year into 2 halves, balanced on the equinoxes like a divine scale. So modern astronomy treats equinoxes and solstices as astronomical positions, but ancient texts saw something more. Literal markers placed into the architecture of creation. The spring and fall equinoxes, day and night are equal, balance. The summer and winter, they're the extremes of light and darkness. The longest day of light and the longest day of darkness. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, Jubilees, and the Enoch calendar all emphasize that God's calendar is solar, not lunar, and it's anchored to the equinoxes. Jubilees warns against abandoning those markers, as we mentioned before, right? That it would corrupt appointed times and make the year begin 10 days too soon. And then First Enoch, 72. It's a remarkable text that speaks of the sun passing through portals as it journeys through the heavens, right? It says that the sun rises through 12 heavenly portals and through 4 special gates, each marking the turning points of the year. Now, these portals are more than poetic metaphors. They describe with precision the sun entering different openings in the firmament. It passes through 6 eastern gates and returns through 6 western gates. It moves northward or southward depending on the season. Now, that strongly suggests that the equinoxes and solstices were understood as actual celestial gate points, positioned at the corners of God's sky clock. And while we may not physically perceive those portals now, they may be spiritually real, visible only to those in glorified or spiritual form, as Enoch, Isaiah, and John were when they saw into heaven. I know some will say, oh my gosh, that's such a cop-out. Well, when we finally get to see those things, then you can tell me it's a cop-out. But until then, just know that there are plenty of things that you can't perceive with your eyes that affect the physical world. If you don't believe that, just take a thought and then make that thought become a physical reality, and you'll see how the invisible can impact the physical world. I do it all the time. Every time I do a podcast, I'm thinking of things. The music that I put into this podcast were originally invisible thoughts you could not see, but I could in my head, and then I turned them into a physical reality that you could hear with your ears, and if you had some way to see the sound wave, you would perceive with your eyes. Just as an example. Or your invisible feelings of love, right? That eventually begins to display itself physically through how you treat a person. There's plenty of ways that invisible attributes impact the physical world. Perhaps not immediately, but eventually. So, biblical harmony with the sky clock, here's how it all aligns. Passover aligns with the spring equinox, often under Pisces and Aries, the end of the fish and the rise of the lamb. Tabernacles aligns with the fallen equinox beneath Virgo and Libra, the virgin giving way to the scales of judgment. These aren't loose connections. They are the literal journey of the sun through the Mazeroth, paired with the appointed times of the Lord. Right? So just for a recap, the feast anchors: Passover, spring equinox, Mazeroth sign, Pisces and Aries. Prophetic meaning, the first coming and the sacrifice of the lamb. The feast, tabernacle, season, fall, celestial marker, fall equinox, Mazeroth sign, Virgo and Libra, the second coming and dwelling in judgment. So, the modern church has forgotten this and doesn't care. The Gregorian calendar, created in 1582 to correct drift in the Julian calendar, detached God's holy days from a sky clock. So today, Easter floats unpredictably. Passover is calculated by rabbinic tradition. Tabernacles is mostly ignored, and we've replaced God's fixed feast days with man-made holidays. Now, I'm not a Seventh-day Adventist, and I'm not, one of those people that says that we need to return to the Jewish stuff or whatever. But these things are important to know if you want to know what's going on, We've basically replaced God's fixed feast days with man-made holidays. But the heavens never drifted. The portal's still open, the sun still marches, and the clock still turns. So, how it all connects: the 12, the 36, and the 4 living creatures. Yep. So the heavens declare, right? But they don't whisper, they roar. We've seen that the stars are not scattered at random. They follow patterns, proclaim stories, and move with intentionality. But the real question many are asking is, how exactly do these constellations connect to the Bible, to the tribes, the apostles, and those 4 living creatures? Well, let's map it out a little bit here, step by step. The 12 primary signs, the Mazeroth, aren't arbitrary zodiac symbols. They're chapters of God's redemptive story, and each has symbolic correspondence to one of the 12 tribes of Israel, one of the 12 apostles of the Lamb, and a stage in the Messiah's mission from virgin birth to conquering king. Psalm 147:4 says, "He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name." That tells us these signs were named, not imagined, and their meaning predates Babylon. Each constellation rises during its assigned season, guiding the appointed times, and this 12-part cycle repeats every year, echoing the biblical structure of 12 seen throughout. 12 patriarchs, 12 stones on the high priest's breastplate, 12 gates of New Jerusalem, 12 thrones in the kingdom. That's in Luke 22:30, by the way, if you want to reference that. The 12 are not coincidence. They're a divine framework for time, order, and inheritance. And the name of our new album, The 12s, coming in November. The 36 decans, companion stories beneath each sign. Each of those 12 constellations has 3 accompanying constellations known as decans, as I mentioned earlier, short for division of 10, as they roughly divide the sky into 10-day periods throughout each month. The 36 decans function like narrative subchapters, giving more detail to the main story told by each constellation. You could think of them as supporting actors in each scene, or side visions that add prophetic depth, or transitions between signs, markers. The Egyptian Dendera zodiac, Hebrew star lore, and even medieval Christian sky maps preserve those decans. And while modern astrology hijacks them for fortune-telling, the original purpose was prophetic storytelling. Right? Enoch, in 1 Enoch 82, 6-8, describes leaders of the stars who rise and fall in courses of 10 days. Well, what do you think that is? That is Enoch knowing and suggesting knowledge of this 36-fold division long before the Greeks named them. You got 12 primary signs and 36 decans each equals 48 sky markers, and these create a full spiritual and agricultural cycle mirroring the rhythms of worship and warfare on Earth. And then we reach the most mysterious layer, the 4 fixed or cardinal signs, right? Leo the lion, Taurus the ox. Aquarius, the man, and Scorpio, the eagle. Yes, more on that in a moment. Because you have to be going, Scorpio? What does a scorpion have to do with an eagle? Well, first, these aren't just constellations. They're found in both astronomy and prophecy. In sky lore, these four are the midpoints of each season, the pillars around which the Mazeroth turns: Taurus, spring; Leo, summer; Scorpio, or the eagle, fall; Aquarius, winter. In biblical prophecy, they appear in the visions of Ezekiel and John. Ezekiel 1:10. Each had the face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. Revelation 4:7. The first living creature was like a lion, the second like an ox, the third had a face like a man, the fourth was like, you guessed it, a flying eagle. And they're not metaphors, they are living representations of God's throne chariot, celestial beings bound to the sky clock itself. So wait, as said earlier, isn't Scorpio a scorpion, not an eagle? And that's a great question. In Hebrew and Akkadian traditions, Scorpio had two forms. The fallen form, which is the scorpion, death, betrayal in Genesis 3. The redeemed or heavenly form, which is the eagle, rising from judgment to glory. This dual imagery preserves both the fall narrative and the resurrection hope, a phoenix-like transformation. Early Christian scholars like Seiss and Bullinger, which again, I recommend those books, and I'm going to put them in the video, tagging them, so if you want them, it's a way for you to support our ministry here and our outreach beyond just sharing. You can support us financially. I'm hoping at one point to get enough listeners and so on to where I can do this full time. I can do a much better job with better detailed information and maybe answer all of my wife's questions every video. Just kidding. Amanda, if you're listening, I love you. So early Christian scholars, like I said, affirm this eagle form in Scorpio as being symbolic of exaltation, especially when paired with Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus. It's spelled Ophiuchus, the serpent holder, and Aquila, the eagle constellation just above it. So the eagle is not an error, it's a revelation, a transformed sign of judgment turned to ascent. Now, why do these four matter? Because they frame the four corners of heaven, the four faces of God's guardians, the four Gospels. The lion is Mark, ox is Luke, man is Matthew, and the eagle is John. And the four primary traits of the Messiah: king, servant, man, and divine. They act as watchtowers in the sky, anchoring the heavens and representing God's sovereignty over all directions, seasons, and dimensions. So when you look up and see these four, you're not seeing mythology. You're seeing the heavenly throne rotating above you, just as Ezekiel and John saw it. So let's recap God's clock in layers. We have 12 constellations that are divine redemptive story, and they are connected to tribes, apostles, gospels, right? In the gospel arc. We have 36 decans, which are the supporting prophetic detail, dividing it into 10 subchapters and cycles, 10-day cycles and subchapters. Then we have the four fixed signs, which are throne guardians and cardinal anchors, and they are seasons, cherubim, and for the gospels. And they're not superstition, they are God's layered calendar seen in motion from Eden to Revelation. Just because the priesthood forgot the clock doesn't mean the clock stopped ticking, right? And can we still track it today? Well, we've walked the arc of the Mazeroth from Eden to Babylon and from the throne to the tribes, but now comes the most practical question of all. Can we still track it? Or is the system broken and lost to history or swallowed by pagan corruption? The answer is simple. Yeah, we can still track it. But we need to relearn how to read the hands of the heavenly clock the way that God designed them. So what still works and what do we watch for? Well, despite a millennia of distortion, censorship, and calendar confusion, much of the Mazeroth still remains visibly intact, especially for the faithful watchman. Here's what can still be tracked and how. 1. The sun's path through the Mazeroth. The sun still moves through the same 12 constellations on the ecliptic, its path through the sky, and you can track this with astronomy apps like the Sky Guide or Stellarium or Skyview, or a printed star wheel matched to your hemisphere, or simply by watching the sunrise points and dusk star patterns month by month. That's what my wife and I kind of do. For instance, Pisces rises just before the spring feast, Passover. Virgo precedes fall feasts like trumpets and tabernacles. Leo sits high in the summer sky. The lion watches the fields. You don't need telescopes, just faithful observation. Number 2, feasts anchored to equinoxes. Even today, Passover is celebrated near the spring equinox, and tabernacles aligns with the fall equinox. By watching when day and night are equal and comparing that to when the full moon rises near the east, you can begin to rebuild the ancient Hebrew calendar from your backyard. Exodus 12:2 sets the year starting in spring. Leviticus 23 outlines the timing of the feasts, and the book of Enoch and Jubilees align with these solar markers. You can restore the timing by noting when the sun crosses the equator, or equinox, and track the first visible crescent moon, aligning this to barley harvest signs and seasonal constellations. Number 3, constellations are seasonal anchors. Each constellation is a monthly marker that tells a part of the redemptive story. If you observe the stars that rise just before dawn, you'll know what season you're in, which tribe apostle narrative is being emphasized, and what prophetic pattern is being replayed. Example, Pisces into Aries equals first coming of the Messiah, lamb rising in spring. Virgo to Libra equals second coming, judgment, and reward, virgin and scales and fall. And then Capricorn to Aquarius equals outpouring and cleansing, winter themes of redemption. It repeats every year and has never stopped. Number 4, reading signs in the sky. Jesus himself said that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. What that means, eclipses can be prophetic. Read Joel 2:31 and Acts 2:20. That's chapter 2, verse 20. For those who don't know that Acts doesn't have 220 chapters. Conjunctions may signal transitions. Blood moons and unusual alignments should be noted, not feared, because we're not given a spirit of fear. We have faith in and trust and respect and love our Creator, our God. So the key is not to speculate wildly, but to compare celestial events with feast timings, align the signs with biblical prophecy, seek confirmation, not sensation. So, relearning the sky clock, a simple guide. We have the component, how to observe, and why it matters. So, we got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these. 5. The first one, the sun's path. Use apps or sky charts to track the ecliptic, and it reveals timing of biblical events. Constellations. Observe the stars rising just before sunrise. Why? Because each sign tells a piece of the redemptive arc. And then equinoxes. Note when day equals night, spring, fall. This anchors feasts and years' true beginning. And then moon phases. Watch first visible crescent after equinox for the times of feast, Leviticus 23. And then eclipses and events. Log dates and compare to feast seasons. And that could mark divine warnings or milestones. So can you still trust this clock? Yes, if you look for what God said, not what the world sold. No one has erased the stars. No one has moved Polaris. They may have destroyed the Georgia Guidestones and the little hole that always you could view Polaris through. But yeah, no one's moved it. And the constellations still rise on time, year after year after year. The heavens haven't stopped talking. We've just stopped listening, like I said. If the sun moves, the feasts still matter. If the constellations rise, the throne is still watching. And if you're willing to learn the language of the sky, you may just hear what the world forgot. So, if you want to start reading God's sky calendar right now, there's some real world ways that people have done it in the past, right? 2027. These are some minor examples of how to read the sky clock today, right? 2027 total solar eclipse. It is set to sweep across key biblical lands, including Egypt, Israel, and Mecca, and lands in America near the path of the 2017 eclipse. Could that be marking a 10-year warning of some sort? And should we be paying attention to the 10 subsection markers while that's going on? I don't know. This is all still somewhat new to me, even though I've taken in a lot of information on it. I'm still discovering this right along with many of you, and I want to know more. So I'll be reading more books on this. And if I find something super fascinating, I'll make a video on it. Virgo, sign of Revelation 12, September 23rd, 2017. There was that rare alignment of Sun, Moon, Jupiter, and 12 stars, and it formed what some believe matches Revelation 12, 1 and 2. Was that a marker? I don't know. But like I said, the world sure seemed to get incredibly strange after all that. I think we're all noticing it. So while there might not have been anything sensational or crazy or whatever right at that moment, that doesn't mean that things weren't happening that you did not perceive in the spirit world that are slowly, through a process, beginning to impact this world. And then we have the tetrad blood moons in 2014 and 2015. We had 4 lunar eclipses all falling on Passover and tabernacles, seen by many as warnings or milestones in redemptive history. Not coincidence. It's coordination. And the thing is, so many people just dismiss it because they don't see, because I guess in this world we're just trained that if we don't see some sort of out of the ordinary, supernatural, incredible events, we just treat everything as common and it's no big deal. And we stop watching and stop looking, even though there could be some process that began during that time that is slowly playing out now in this physical world. And then we have the rising of Leo before Tisha B'Av. In Jewish tradition, the lion constellation, Leo rising just before the 9th of Av, is seen as a harbinger of judgment connected to both temple destructions. And then barley and Abib. Any Messianic believers now track the first ripened barley in Israel, not a rabbinic calendar, to determine biblical New Year timing, just as Exodus 12:2 commands. And then planetary alignments. When planets like Jupiter, which is the king, it represents the king, Venus, the bridegroom, and Saturn, the adversary, align in meaningful constellations, it's worth comparing to the biblical season and calendar. Check it out and see what's going on. You may not have 100% detail, but at least know this, that it's something to watch for and then keep your eyes peeled. These are not astrology, they're astronomy viewed through a biblical prophetic lens. And with that, I'm beginning to lose my voice again, so it's time to wrap it up because we're going on 2 hours, folks. So, the heavens still speak, but not everyone listens. But to those who do, the watchmen, the pilgrims, the seekers, the sky unveils more than just stars. It reveals a king on the move. And we've now explored a deeper framework of God's sky clock, the 12 constellations, the 36 decans, and the 4 living creatures rotating like throne room guardians across the heavens. But most importantly, we showed you how you can still kind of read it today. Even though much of the details have been lost to time or hidden or destroyed in things like the Alexandrian fire in Egypt, or maybe even hidden away by those who don't want you to know about it. But the signs haven't stopped. They've just been ignored. Kind of like the One Ring I mentioned earlier. It just went out of time and out of thought until things started happening. And then everybody was like, oh, what is this? But then the good stewards of the world, they realized, Gandalf went all the way to Gondor, right, to find out, to Minas Tirith, and searched through all those archives for months before returning to the Shire. And he knew, without a doubt, in that moment, that it was the One Ring. And so that's what I mean. When you see these signs, you need to dig for details. I can't do everything in a 2-hour show, but I can at least give you a foundation, a starting point for you to dig deeper. And one way to do that would be, to also read these books and read scripture, some combination thereof, to better inform yourself, right? Never hurts to read scripture, right? So keep watching, not in superstition, but in expectation, because the story of redemption is still being told in the stars. So if you like this episode, just know that we're going to cover the last 6 in part 3 next Monday. And in the meantime, please share this video with as many people as possible so that we can get out there, like the video, comment on it, persuade my wife to come on the show. Just kidding. No, I'm not really. It would be great to have her on the show. And if you want to come on the show, I have been a bit more faithful in these Monday programs to make sure to include our email address at pilgrimsgray@gmail.com. So if you would like to be on the show to tell us your story, how you came to know about these things, what you think about such matters, it's not as if I'm going to bite you or anything. I like to get to know the people who are listening. And again, if you wind up purchasing merchandise or even a book and you want to say, hey, I got this book by E.W. Bullinger because it was recommended by Pilgrim's Gray Chronicles, Robert Clark. And here it is. Hold it up, take a picture, and send it to me at pilgrimsgray@gmail.com. And I will be happy to plaster your face all over these YouTube videos with your wonderful purchase and acknowledge you for supporting our podcast. Anyway, in the meantime, I'm going to play you out with our kind of a new closing out track for Pilgrim's Gray, because a lot of people, I don't want to play the Lantern of Gray at the beginning, which is this one right here. See? And also play that at the end. I like to keep you entertained, give you more bang for the buck, And so we're going to give you a new outro and try to always, change up the outro from time to time. But I'm going to leave that Lantern of Gray because it was done by a really, really big fan of the show. And so we're just going to leave that one there because I want to do that to show my gratitude for listeners who do such things, because it's rare. Most people just listen and take it in, and that's it. And that's fine. I'm glad that you're even listening. But for those rare people who interact and share and then send us music to use for the show or send us encouraging emails, and I'm really, really longing to see some folks that are in our gear, our shirts, our hats, our coffee mugs, and whatever, and I can share them in the show. So if you want that to be you, and maybe you be the first person to appear on the show in that way, as a photo, pilgrimsgray@gmail.com, and get you a mug, get you a backpack, get you a shirt, get you a hoodie, whatever. Just support in any way you can. And here is the new outro. I hope you enjoy it and that you have an awesome, awesome work week, and we will see you Wednesday night.
Hey!
Gather round, ye travelers, lend me your ear. A tale of heroes who knew no fear. Through shadowed woods and mountains steep, their legacy lives where the wild winds sweep. Raise your tankard. Pilgrim's Gray. Murs carried on the ale-soaked breeze, songs as endless as the trees. Raise your tankards high and sing for the great pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Their stories stay. Hail the chronicles of Pilgrim's Grave.